Okay. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the spring edition of the Children's Cause for Cancer Advocacy's webinar series. I'm George Dahlman, and I'll be your moderator for this session. This is the latest in a series of webinar. Wait a minute, start broadcast. Hi, I'm sorry for the delay, but good afternoon and welcome to the spring edition of the Children's Cause for Cancer Advocacy's webinar series. I'm George Dahlman and I'll be your moderator for the session. This is the latest in a series of webinars hosted by Children's Cause to inform and mobilize childhood cancer advocates. Today's edition is an update on the Patient-Focused Drug Development Conference on chemotherapy-induced hearing loss that was held last September. If you've signed up for this webinar, you should have access to a draft report on the proceedings that we're just finalizing now for transmittal to the FDA. And if you've looked over it, you'll recognize some of the themes we'll be talking about today. Before we start, I wanted to go over a few reminders and housekeeping items. If you need any technical assistance, there's a number on the screen there. It's 202-487-3270. Just call that if you have any problems with this. Today's call is being recorded and it'll be available later afterwards at the website childrenscause.org. And we're joined today by 4 distinguished panelists, all of whom were instrumental in September's PFDD. This is a format as a brief overview of the event and some of the themes that we heard and the impressions about those issues, and then we'll open it up for some questions from the audience. Some of you may have submitted questions ahead of time, and thank you for that. And during the course of the webinar, if you have any other questions, just type them in and you'll see on the screen on the right, you'll see a Q&A section. You can just submit your questions. Everybody will be on mute during the course of it. At the end of the webinar, you will be automatically steered to a post-webinar survey, and if you could, please take a few minutes to fill that out because it's very helpful for us to determine how this went and topics for future webinars. So just to set the stage a little bit about what this was about and what the format was, on September 13th last year, 4 organizations, Children's Cause for Cancer Advocacy, Children's Brain Tumor Foundation, Maddie Miracle Cancer Foundation, and Momcology hosted an externally led patient-focused drug development conference. And the purpose was to share with senior officials at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and other stakeholders on the perspectives and experiences of people living with chemotherapy-induced hearing loss and its impact on their lives and their expectations and priorities for any new treatments that are in the pipeline. The meeting was conducted in accordance with FDA's new initiative, which is intended to collect patients' perspectives on their conditions and what therapies and treatments would be most useful for them. This was also part of the 21st Century Cures Act, which put more emphasis on patient input in the regulatory process so that regulators can learn more about outcome measures that matter to patients and how patients weigh the balances of risks and benefits in different treatments. For the event in September, there were about 200 individuals who were involved with it, about 100 in person and about 100 on a webcast. We had 10 officials from FDA and NIH who attended to hear directly from individuals with chemotherapy-induced hearing loss and from their caregivers and other stakeholders in the community. Among those, I'm happy to say, was Dr. Gregory Riemann, who heads up the Pediatric Division at the Oncology Center of Excellence at FDA, and we're very honored to have Dr. Riemann with us today. So to introduce our speakers, we have also joining us Kat Paciente from Momcology, who was very instrumental in producing the event, and 2 of the panelists who really gave of themselves during the conference in explaining their experiences and very, very convincingly. I'd like to start out really talking about some of the kind of the scientific side of it or medical side of it that we heard about the effects of chemotherapy-induced hearing loss. Then Kat will recount some of the personal themes we heard from panelists, both the patients and the caregivers, which really, excuse me, are highlighted in the report. And then Carolyn and Courtney can offer their perspectives on what those conclusions were and how they experienced them. At the outset, we heard from Professor Christy Knight from Oregon Health and Science University about some of the statistics in her specialty of addressing this with patients. And as we all know, in the childhood cancer community, there'll be about 500,000 long-term survivors of childhood cancer by next year. And about a third of those can expect at least one life-threatening late effect as a result of that treatment. Now, one of the late effects that we focused on has to do with varying degrees of permanent hearing loss. In the US, about 5,000 children receive platinum chemotherapy every year. And usually those are for brain and central nervous system cancers, neuroblastoma, hepatoblastoma, osteosarcoma, germ cell tumor, and retinoblastoma. And about 50 to 60% of kids treated with cisplatin and 5 to 20% of those treated with carboplatin have some degree of irreversible hearing loss. The incidence goes up to 80 or 90% in those receiving both cisplatin and carboplatin. And the prevalence of hearing loss among those with radiation, well, 10 to 14%. With cranial radiation and cisplatin, that goes up to over 80%. Age is a really pretty decisive determining factor. At the time of diagnosis and treatment is the degree to which there is induced ototoxicity. Children that are 5 years or less are at 21 times greater risk for developing hearing loss than some of their older compatriots. And the risk factors include how much of the platinum dose, both the individual dose and the total dose, the cranial radiation before cisplatin treatment, and the use of more than one ototoxic medication while they're in treatment.
Radiation was after.
Now, the time of outset of hearing loss, it can vary depending upon number of factors. During the first or second cisplatin cycle, ototoxicity occurs in both ears and is permanent. The hearing loss is usually with high frequency sounds, but that increases in degree and spreads to lower frequencies as the treatment continues. Hearing loss is permanent disability that children have the ramifications for all of them run the gamut, as we heard at the conference, affect speech and language development, learning, social development, and certainly employment, and obviously affect lifetime earnings. And it's on some of those themes that we heard so convincingly. And I'd like to ask Kat, you'll see in the report if you have a chance to look at it. I'd like to turn it over to Kat, who is a great partner in this effort, to summarize some of those themes and some of the testimony that we heard during the conference. So Kat, if you would like to take it from there.
Sure. Thank you, George. And thank you for hosting this webinar. This is a great follow-up to the event last September. I'm going to go ahead and share some of the themes that were uncovered during the workshop and summarize each of the findings among each of those themes. So next slide. Communications. So we discovered that this area has a huge impact. It impacts every facet of life. Our panelists and audience members described frustration, embarrassment, personal and professional challenges that they face daily due to their hearing loss. Challenges ranged from early childhood and learning sound production to struggling professionally when unable to hear your boss and hear what their feedback might be for you. We discovered throughout the day that communication and the associated challenges hearing loss presents have an enormous impact on the daily lives of those who suffer hearing loss. Next slide. Socialization. Every single member of our panel and audience talked a great deal about socialization and the challenges. Hearing loss can make social situations very awkward, and many of our participants suffer from social anxiety. In the polling, we discovered that the most important activity people felt they were losing was the ability to communicate with their friends and participate in social activities. Many shared that they often will sit quietly to the side in social situations or simply not even subject themselves to social environments, which, as you can understand, might result in isolation or disconnection. Clearly, social impact of hearing loss has a profound effect on each individual's quality of life. Next slide.
Working on it. Okay,
All right,
here we go.
there we go. So physical and social participation was interesting. I think many were surprised at the physical effect of hearing loss and the impact on balance. Many with hearing loss suffer balance issues that prevent them from being able to participate in sports or extracurricular activities, even attend events and some things you might not think about, like being around larger crowds or even on uneven terrain. In addition to the physical barriers, there was a good deal of discussion surrounding social participation and the lost opportunities resulting from hearing loss. Next slide. Depression. A number of our attendees spoke about depression. As you can read on the slide, one mother described her son's depression and feeling that he wished the cancer had taken his life. He wasn't alone. It's uncomfortable, but imperative that we talk about the extraordinary deep impact that loss of hearing can have on a person's life. I commend our panelists and participants for opening up and sharing what were very personal and very real emotions about their lives with hearing loss.
Okay.
Next slide. Emotional and behavioral issues. We discovered that there were a lot of emotional and behavioral effects as a result of hearing loss. Our panelists spoke about meltdowns, exhaustion, loneliness, fear, frustration, anxiety, low self-esteem, and even compulsive behaviors. I'm hopeful that sharing these emotional stories will really stick with people and help them to understand hearing loss and hopefully place greater emphasis on protecting hearing during treatment, as well as the importance of development in hearing recovery. Next slide.
What are you looking for? Did you want to pass?
Safety. Safety concerns were expressed really kind of throughout the day on both panel presentations and in the audience feedback. There were many safety concerns for people who have hearing loss. There's fear that you might not hear a person approach from behind on a late night, or the smoke alarm, an ambulance approaching, traffic, even a child's cry for help, as one of our panelists spoke about. These are very real safety concerns that this population has to consider every day, and they have a very obvious impact on everyday life. Next slide.
Mhm.
So now that's kind of just an overview of some of the themes that we uncovered during the workshop, and we'd like to open it up now for some discussion with Carolyn and Courtney to talk some real world impact.
Yeah, Carolyn, if I could, if you can you hear all right?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, great, thank you. You had some great illustrations of kind of the social challenges you face. I remember you talking about going to some parties or maybe not going to some parties. Did you, and I was curious about the fact that you were able to meet other people, young people who kind of went through the same thing and have the same issues that you do. For one, was that any kind of encouragement for you to just to find other people who were other patients or young adults who have the same issues?
I would definitely say that it was helpful to meet other people with the same kind of hearing loss because it gave me an opportunity to ask questions that like doctors can't answer. And so I got an opportunity to ask about like problems that we have with our hearing that you kind of have to experience to know what I'm talking about.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Did you get any encouragement from the fact that we were holding this conference and that there were people at the FDA and NIH that were interested enough to hear what you had to say about treatments and how they should approach them?
It definitely makes me happy to know that people care because a lot of the work that I do is to help future kids so that they don't have the problems that I have.
Hmm.
And up until now, there hasn't really been that much attention to the current survivors and the problems that we face every day. And so it is very reassuring to just to know that people care, really.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. What was if I could actually, we'll go back and forth. I think between you and Courtney. I think Courtney, you had some great illustrations, and I think very telling for those of us, or all of us, who work in a professional setting on the kinds of things that you have to go through on a professional basis. Um, do you find that a lot of your colleagues, professional colleagues, are fairly understanding of what you have to face?
Yeah, I would say most of the time, they definitely are. I think where it really starts is I had to get to a place where I even recognized that there was a problem. And I think that it was like really just kind of coming to terms with that and recognizing it. And then being able to kind of have those conversations, and how do you have those conversations? And then also, they're super helpful, and they want to kind of set up the environment so that it's accommodating, but they don't necessarily have the answers. So it's also up to me to kind of figure out what are those solutions, how can that be helpful. And it's a little bit of an ironic platform as we sit here to do a webinar, because that's one of the many platforms that's sometimes more challenging for me, because you're not able to see people on video or see their lips and their mouths. So the lip reading is much harder. In the professional world and in the personal world, you deal with a lot of accents. You deal with a lot of phone calls, webinars, which, in different tones of voices, which all makes it so much more challenging. So it's really on a case by case basis, but I think that it's been super helpful for me to, number one, like recognize what it is, and then to understand what some of the solutions are that can be really helpful. But overall, I mean, everyone is super supportive, and they want to help. It's just kind of knowing how they can.
Right, right. And I think I was struck with how upfront you are with other people in a professional setting. I think in a lot of cases, and I have a personal experience with this too, that frequently, people who have a hearing loss might be reluctant to admit to it or admit to a problem. And I think that was one of the things that struck me about your discussion, was about how you looked for solutions to do it. And I think that's pretty admirable. Did you have any encouragement from this process and from having those officials there?
I mean, absolutely. I will say, I'm 34 years old and I've lived with this my whole life. And this was the first time in my entire life that I've been in a community of other people that, understood what I was going through. And even though, with my own family, we talked about it and doctors would talk about it with us, nobody obviously can understand unless you are someone that's in this exact position. So it was an amazing opportunity to be able to hear the inspiring, humbling, and very heartbreaking, stories that people shared. And I'm so grateful for the community that kind of came together, because I know it probably wasn't easy for most everyone there to put themselves in these vulnerable situations. But it's super, exciting to hear that this is being talked about and this being recognized, and that we don't have to be like silent anymore, and that it is. I mean, I read the conclusion of the report that's being put out, and talking about this kind of silent disability, and it really is. And I think another huge aspect that I took away from the meeting was a lot of the challenges that I had faced, I didn't necessarily recognize them as challenges. I just kind of accepted them as a way that my life has been and is. And so kind of having that validation and hearing other people, of why you get certain anxieties and why you avoid certain situations, or the kind of why you are the way you are. It was really kind of, it was validating to kind of know that this has an effect, and it does shape you to who you are. So I think that, the community building and having everyone together and knowing that people are listening and it's just being heard and hopefully to help children in the future is really exciting.
Right, right. For either of you, Carolyn or Courtney, for those different themes that Kat went through, and can you relate to any of those beyond the ones that you personally had testimony about? I mean, some of the include any kind of physical issues and balance, or certainly the depression or anxieties.
I mean, I can relate to all of the above when it comes to the things that Kat discussed. I can't ride a bike. I can't learn to ride a bike because of my hearing loss, because I'm off balance. I have trouble walking down the stairs because of my balance. I have very few friends because if there's more than 3 people in a conversation, I have no idea what's happening. The only reason that I made any friends when I went to college was because a girl literally walked up to me and said, "Hi, we're gonna be friends." That's how I made my friends, and if she hadn't done that, I would not have met any of my friends, because I am terrified to talk to people because I am not sure that I'm going to understand what they're saying.
Right. And I remember I think a story that you told about you going to a party and feeling kind of out of place.
Yeah, because I didn't know what was happening, because if there's too many noises, everything just kind of blends together for me.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to like my friends like helping me and taking care of me, like Courtney said, everyone wants to help, but I don't always want to need help. I don't want them to feel like they need to take care of me. In those situations, I just feel like I'm more of a problem than a person.
Right. Yeah, and it's on a personal level, my wife has the same problem. She was born with it, but we've had the same family issues, and I think maybe both of you can relate to is just the gaps that are there, and trying to. I think Josh had mentioned this. The trying to work so hard because you have gaps there, and you're expending so much energy and effort trying to fill in those gaps. It can be exhausting.
Well, I didn't really that didn't really occur to me until I think my mom mentioned it one day. But just I'm tired all the time, and I had no idea why I was so tired. And my mom was like, "Well, it's probably because you're straining to hear so much." And I was like, "Wait, is that a thing that not everyone does?"
Right.
It was a new concept for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you find some of the same things, Courtney?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it became much more aware. Like I said, it's just kind of something that I just kind of accepted into my life. But hearing and kind of categorizing it, if you will, into different anxieties and safety and all the things. I mean, there are things that are a huge part of who I am and things I am aware of that I avoid certain situations. Like, Carolyn was saying, I really don't enjoy going to like large groups, whether that be in friends or like friend groups or going to different events where there can be a lot of, crowds of people. So it definitely kind of, it controls what, what I choose to do. And it affects my relationships with people because some people just don't understand and they're like, well, it's okay. You don't have to talk, you can just enjoy. But I'm like, you don't understand what that's like. It is exhausting. And you just kind of feel like you're in a bubble if you really can't hear things. So it's frightening. It's scary. And I mean, these are all things that I think I subconsciously just did, but I think that this kind of brought more awareness to how I act and why I do the things that I do. And for me, I mean, since the meeting, it has been helpful to kind of, share this paper with family and close friends and to kind of bring awareness to that. And it helps them also kind of have a little bit more acceptance and understanding and empathy for like what we're going through.
Right. I'm curious. I think I remember Carolyn mentioning this. This conference was focused on the the hearing loss. Were there other late effects that either of you had that you thought were just as significant or complicate the hearing as well?
I am horribly dyslexic, and
Mm.
so not being able to hear is not real helpful with not being able to spell.
Mhm. Right.
Um, I have to have a language waiver for school because, you can't speak a language that you can't hear.
Right.
Um, oh, I like there's a lot of like movies and stuff that I can't watch even with like subtitles on because I can't read the subtitles that fast and I can't understand what the people are saying in the movie.
Hmm.
So I just kind of sit there and gasp.
Right. I remember, I think it was you talked about going to a movie and having to count the lights in the ceiling.
Yes,
That stuck with me.
we went to a movie that I was really excited about. Um, the movie was called The Zookeeper's Wife, and it was set during World War II, and it's about this woman who, like, her husband owned a zoo, and it's about how she um, helped Jewish people escape and like hid them in this zoo.
Right.
And I am a gigantic history dork, so I was very excited about it. But about 10 minutes into the movie, I realized that I couldn't understand what anyone was saying because of their accents.
Hmm. Right.
And I'm just because I can't hear it, I'm not going to be like, okay, we have to leave now. And so I just kind of sat there in the movie theater and counted the lights in the ceiling because I had no idea what was happening.
Hmm. Yeah. Do both of you use hearing aids, and how helpful are they?
Um, I would say that my hearing aids are helpful, but even with them, there are some things that I still just can't hear.
Right.
So they're helpful to a degree, but it's not the same. It's not like you can like put on a pair of glasses. It's not the same thing.
Right. Exactly. Courtney, do you use them as well?
I do not. I think most of that decision came from they did not correlate hearing loss to chemotherapy until I was probably in high school. So for me, it was more timing. And when I was in high school, I just was not interested in getting hearing aids. And and then from there, I mean, I get my hearing test every couple of years, and they always recommend them and suggest it. But again, they say it's not like putting glasses on. You really have to go through a training. It's a huge adjustment, and there's a lot of pros and cons to it. And I think that where I am right now, I just have never kind of put the energy into it and feel like I've been kind of getting by without them. So I haven't seen a huge. I just haven't. I've decided I didn't want them.
Right. I, I don't know, but maybe you can comment on it. I wonder if your ability to adapt in some ways, maybe you mentioned lip reading, um, you may have, I mean, you tell me, may have gotten adapted to that much more easily, probably because you didn't have the hearing aids.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think, again, like, I think it's just so subconscious when one thing doesn't work as well, you try to,
Mhm.
substitute it for other things. So my other senses are much more alert. But yeah, again, like, I don't know anything different. So it's really hard for me to like speak on that because this is just the way that, the way that my life is. I did have a friend that not due to chemotherapy, but she had a hearing loss and she got a hearing aid when we were in college and she no longer wears them. And again, she just said that they didn't really work for her. So I kind of saw her experience with it and just decided not to do it that time. However, recently, a lot of my family was recommending that I look into it again with the new technology, and it could really benefit me. So I might be more interested as the technology gets better and better. But especially hearing kind of the pros and cons during the meeting as well. It's like you start hearing a lot of other things that maybe you don't want to hear. So
Right.
I don't know. It's a personal decision for me, but as of my whole life, I've never worn hearing aids.
Yeah. That was, I think it speaks to how powerful some of the statements were at this conference. I remember I got maybe discomfort of the hearing aids, or the fact that they just amplify everything. I remember, it was one of the moms had said, when my son comes home, before his backpack is off or his shoes are off or anything else, he takes those hearing aids out. And I thought that said so much about, the difficulty and the challenge it is in using them. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that as well.
Yeah, there are quite a few, and I think there was that mom who had suffered hearing loss herself, and then her child actually had the same thing, and it was very touching about how she was concerned about not being able to hear her kids if there was any problem at night, and that's it's scary to think about that. Court, I also want to ask, well, you had mentioned, we did for those listening, we did a call last week where we were just discussing this webinar, and Courtney asked me a question that kind of caught me up short a little bit, but I think it's worth addressing, and that was really what the goal of this whole process is, the conference itself, and I think, the webinar today. And I think, of course, the goal really is to help the FDA and the other stakeholders, whether it's NIH or researchers at other institutions, and also the pharma industry and how they're going about doing this, to better understand what the patients go through, and really give greater attention and investment in both, the prevention and the cures. There are several companies that are working on these things now, both in the treatment side of things, and hopefully, there are some stories I've heard about companies working on restoration kind of techniques. Those would be encouraging. So I guess along those lines, and that's why I want to ask. We're also joined today by Dr. Greg Riemann. And Dr. Riemann, I just wanted to ask you whether you, your impression of the event, and also whether you think had been helpful to have these patients as well as the others, hearing them, and what impact you think it might have on FDA and how it goes about its deliberations.
Well, I think this whole externally led patient-focused drug development workshop was really quite impactful. I have to say personally that I was moved just hearing the stories, which for me were really eye-opening and ear-opening. Despite the fact that I've taken care of children with cancer for decades, and have seen and experienced children and families living with this disability, to hear the stories of children and their families impacted so severely and for so long and progressively over such a long period of time, to the point of even considering suicide was just enormous for me, and I think for all of us and the other physicians who happened to be there. So I think this is the kind of real life experience that the agency needs to hear. I was also impressed by the sort of list of what next wishes the group sort of put forward, and what would be particularly meaningful, and including attempts to develop drug or biologic products or even devices that might be able to restore or partially restore hearing, which obviously has immediate potential for those survivors currently affected by hearing loss. But then to also, speak to the need with passion about opportunities to prevent hearing loss through medications that might prevent the adverse toxicity of certain agents, notably platinum on the ear, and the potential that has not just for them and not so much for them, but for the future generations of children who will require therapeutic intervention for a variety of different cancers. So, we are certainly committed to do what we can. We would encourage and try and support sponsors who come in with novel ideas to test products that may restore hearing or prevent hearing loss. In our particular area of the FDA and the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research and Biologics, we're really looking more at therapeutic product interventions and not so much devices. So, I think making the findings of this workshop available to our colleagues in the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, which regulates any therapeutic and diagnostic devices, would be important. And I don't think there was representation at the workshop from that center, but that's something that we clearly need to do. But I really do think that this was very well put together, and the testimony from patients and families was inspiring, and I think will definitely make a difference, and hopefully will continue to make a difference.
Right. That's good to hear. I don't know if you're really able to answer this, but I'm just curious and we will have this report to you shortly. We have to just format it more than anything else and make sure we have it in the format that's appropriate for FDA. Is there a process for how these kinds of reports are kind of classified within the decision-making process at FDA?
These particular reports, George, I can't really address with certainty, since I think this is a relatively new process. But clearly the FDA takes into its consideration data from multiple sources. So it's not it's primarily data that are submitted by sponsors who submit the applications for licensing a specific product. But in the process of review, then evaluating literature, and clearly there is a body of literature that speaks to the problem and the enormity of the problem. But I think if this workshop proceedings and even some of the personal testimony, if even video of it were made available to the agency, I think as reviewers review applications for agents or products that might prevent or ameliorate or mitigate some hearing loss, or prevent it entirely, or restore hearing, I think it would have a very significant effect on their deliberations and decision making.
Yeah, that's good to hear. There were some, I'm just curious, there were some, I think, companies who were in attendance at this that are working on the regeneration of hair follicles for hearing. That's not something that would come up before the OCE at all, though, would it? It'd be in neurology?
Probably not OCE. You know, things like that would probably come up to the neurology division, correct? So, you know, our sort of authority would extend to agents that might impact the extent of hearing loss, particularly when there are questions of interfering with the efficacy of a drug to treat the cancer, and making sure that outcomes aren't jeopardized. But the specific situation that you raise would probably not come to OCE, although there could certainly be, you know, a consultation to our center office that would that could provide consultation on the significance of this problem, and the fact that the enormous impact that it has on long-term quality of life. You know, I think you know, having that sort of support internally from people who have seen and witnessed it would be helpful.
Right.
So there is that element.
That's great. And we did have, it was broadcast as a live stream over the net. Right. And then we do have that, it's also archived online. So I think obviously with the report, we'll be submitting it to you, and probably want to make sure that the neurology, your neurology colleagues have the same thing.
Sure. And I would also suggest that you, you know, as you learn about, you know, companies that may be interested in this area, that you make the information and the webcast available to them as well, because they could certainly incorporate some of that in their application processes when they come in with investigational drugs or investigational devices.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
We have a little bit of time, and I know that there are several folks on the webinar who were attendees at this event, and I just wanted to you know, open it up to any of them who want to ask a question. You're on mute, but if you would like to submit a question, we can all try to address it. I think to Kat or to me, who were helped put this together, but also to the panelists or to Dr. Riemann, you can submit a question on the in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen if you have any. I guess, Carolyn or Courtney, I suppose I'd ask you if you had any other impressions of the event, and whether you had any kind of messages for what you hope it conveyed to FDA.
This is Courtney here. So I think one thing when I was preparing for this webinar too is just to try to find the right words to explain what a day in the life is. I think is really challenging and really hard. And so I think just to remember that we've heard bits and pieces, but to know that the bigger picture is, it's very challenging and it's more emotional and tougher than I think anybody can really explain. And also, you know, we've talked about hearing loss here as we we really highlight kind of that long-term effect. But most, if not all, childhood cancer survivors are battling many different side effects. And so this is just one. And I think that it really just kind of shows part of the picture, but not to forget that there's a battle that is continuing on through many different health, there's so many to name. So I think that's just one aspect that it's really hard to just kind of put into words and into 1 hour, into one group. But like Carolyn was saying, it's easy for us it's nice to kind of get together and to know that other people can understand what you're going through and that they feel those same things. But it's really hard to relate that, I think, to people that maybe don't experience that.
Exactly. Yeah. And in fact, there is one of the participants who is just checked in. I remember they'd come all the way from Hawaii for this with her daughter. And she's just saying thanks. But I remember one of the things that she brought up is right to your point, Courtney, is fertility issues. And it's one that I remember Ruthie brought up that she and her daughter were concerned about. And I think it's, as you said, just another issue that childhood cancer patients have to deal with. Hopefully we can do something else like this, another conference that addresses that type of issue. But I know that there are, as you say, there are numerous issues associated with it, and each one of them deserves a lot of attention. So, Carolyn, did you have anything to add? No? It's okay. Don't have to. Great. Well,
this is Kat. I just wanted to real quick, I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Riemann for that feedback. I found it feels really good to hear that we're being heard. And I'd like to, just say thank you for that. And to Courtney's point about, this is just one part. I think that our messaging during both the conference and today is pretty clear. I think that it was surprising to a lot of people who didn't really originally think hearing loss was of great concern. I think that this presentation and sharing the stories was really, really helpful in sharing that it's not just hearing loss. It's loss of so many things: independence and confidence and well-being and connection, learning. It's a loss of a lot of things that are impacting the quality of life. And I just really hope that when there are deliberations on drugs or devices or protocols, that our voices are in your heads, and you know that this is of great importance to us, and it sounds to me like you consider it of great importance to you as well, and that feels really good, and we appreciate it. So thank you.
Right. Thank you, Kat.
Yeah.
I think that, and this is just a shot of all the patients and their parents or caregivers that were at the conference. And I think, obviously, as Kat just said, this is great. And I want to echo that. Thank you, Dr. Riemann, for, your willingness and obvious concern about the issues that patients face. And, we're very grateful for it. And this is, really the message that I think all of them conveyed during that event, was that they're really looking forward to some kind of treatments, whether it's during the course of their cancer treatment or it's after the fact in some kind of restoration. There's obviously some hope out there with some ongoing work and by several of the companies that are working on this. So hopefully we will see that day. We're getting close to the top of the hour. If there aren't any other questions, if there are any other observations by anybody, I think we can wrap up in a minute. But I just want to say, I think it was such a great testament for all of you to be part of this, and I think it was a valuable, very valuable exercise, and particularly for Carolyn and Courtney and the other folks who invested so much time and energy, and really the emotional commitment, I think, that went into this, to be able to put yourself out there and talk about this, and for the benefit that it has for not just yourselves, but obviously, but for other patients who are going into treatment now or will face it in the future, and hopefully will end up with a much better situation because of it. So again, for today and for September, last September, thank you very much for the help. If there are no other questions, I think we'll wrap it up. But I think if you have any, please submit them to us at Children's Cause. As I said, that this webinar will be broadcast or will be available online at our website. And if you'll please take a moment to fill out the survey afterwards, we'll be very grateful. It helps us develop future webinars and improve the process as we go along. We will be doing another webinar in June that focuses on legislative updates. We began focusing on a lot of state issues this year, and there are a number of advocates that are working on things at the state level that we are supporting, and we hope that you'll join us for that. Otherwise, I want to thank you all for joining us today, and especially our panelists, and take care and have a good day.